Welcome to Constance Cairns' glycogen depletion phase for her peak week of her program. So, glycogen depletion, to kind of give you the backstory of what's going on, is Constance has been dieting down for the past few months, and she's in quite a depleted state where if we were to look at probably the nutritional factor, so if we go nutrition plan, so if we were to just enter some simple numbers into a plan, this would input for Constance. So let's go. Constance is currently at 48 kilos, sitting around 157, 24. So this is our data that we have on the athlete. This gives us her theoretical baseline, so what she needs to train, and she's training every day at the moment, so she needs 1,841. So if we were to calculate that based off the numbers here, the goal is to keep protein up, so we're keeping it at 115. Now, fats is on the lower side. It's coming from proteins and meats. Not really ingesting too much fat there, so ticking those boxes there. In a fat loss phase of 20% deficit, she's at 121. Now, bear in mind, when 55 has a bit more weight, there's a lot more calories there. That's an extra serve of carbohydrates. So for the purpose of this video, we're only talking about Constance right now and where she's in her body comp. So theoretically, if we did have her at a high weight, this would probably be a 40% deficit. And so if we were to take away to 50 grams of carbs, we'd be at about a 60% deficit. Now, if we look at how the body's actually adapted with this current weight, really it's only got her at about a 30 to 40% deficit. So plot thickens. Well, we then have Constance moving about an hour, which burns another 400 to 600 calories. So that pushes her into that 70 to 80% deficit. So the thing to note is that at any one point of time, just by her weight shifting, the body is looking at ways to conserve energy so it doesn't actually sit in an 80% deficit. Upon paper, if we have the athlete worked from the current weight, then yes, the body is actually in a hypothetical 80% deficit. So the body has actually had to adjust. So let's go a little bit further into this. Low glycogen and performance with exercise. Low glycogen availability causes a shift in substrate metabolism during and after exercise. In addition, low glycogen availability induces an increase in systemic release of amino acids, simultaneously increasing fat oxidation. So this is where we're seeing more fat being depleted, because the body is going to want to mobilize fatty acids into the bloodstream to use as energy and break it down into glycogen, which is pretty cool. Now, the thing is, the release of amino acids is if that the body at a point will start to get colder, it'll slow itself down. This is why we're seeing the athlete Constance probably looking a little lethargic. She's probably finding it hard to remember a few things, becoming a bit forgetful, because these things are starting to happen, because there's less fat available now, that the body will start to shift to amino acid profile. This is why when you see people in a glycogen state, depleted state, they do start to get smaller because the glucose in the muscle decreases. Now, the good thing about this is if we wanted to keep her this size, then we wouldn't do anything, but the goal is to present a bigger package on the stage. And this is great because it means that the muscle has gotten smaller, it's shrinking, but it means that because the body isn't really used to carbohydrates, when we go into this, give it an abundance of glucose, it actually has a compensation effect. So based off this, if she's let's say it's 50 because it's easy, the average body can handle about 5-6 grams of carbohydrates in the muscle. So Constance naturally will store about 300 grams of glucose in her muscle at any one point in time. When she trains, she probably depletes it by 30%, but because she's been in a depleted state for much longer, it means that her body's running lower. Now, the body will compensate for a short space of time. Now, with that being said, we can push her up to 10 grams of carbohydrates. Now, the way to think of this and how I'm addressing it is, one, you could give the athlete 8 to 10 grams of carbohydrates and for one day, but the problem with that is you've had them in a state where they're depleting, they probably haven't eaten much, the body has adapted in its metabolism. So if you were to force feed 10 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight, One, it could be uncomfortable digestively, so she might not be able to eat at all. Two, causes bloating, so then you're going to have to take laxatives to clear that bowel out. Three, from going from the this state from 1,841 down into fat loss like 1,100, you go up 10 grams of carbs, you're going to throw that client over in a fat spillover phase. So that's over one day. Now the body's compensation effect won't just happen after one day. It'll actually occur over a few days. So to conclude, depletion of microglycogen is strongly associated with a degree of fatigue development during endurance exercises. So the thing to conclude here is that we're not actually going to give Constance 10 grams. We're going to give about 6 to 8. So it'll bring her baseline back up to a baseline so she can start to have normal function. But we want to maximize the body's uptake of this glucose into the muscle cell and not have a fat spillover. So this being all this information, we have to conclude that it's more through endurance-based exercises. So one, we need to cause fatigue. So what we've done is we've given her 50 grams of carbs per day. She could probably handle 250 to 300, but we're giving her less so we have a compensation effect. And this happens over really a 2-week period, so it's quite tough. Two, we need to then prioritize probably more high rep work, more muscular endurance work, to force the body into a compensation effect to maximize uptake of glucose into the muscle cell to minimize fat spillover. Now, if we do have a bit of fat spillover and covered in the detailed email to Constance and the crew, so if we scroll down on here, the thing to note is in this email, for Constance, is if she spills over with fat, is that she will do about 60 to 90 minutes of walking, steady state, and then some posing. So she does some isometric contractions, because when you contract, you mobilize glucose, but the thing is if you isometric contract, you signal to store a little more glucose in that muscle cell. Third, carbohydrates, where there is carbs and where there is salt, water goes. So we're also going to increase water intake and salt to increase the loading into the cell. So if we go sodium water loading, adenosine receptor, not quite. The way to think of sodium loading is, okay. So what we have is, if this is our normal cell, cell swells as water is pulled in from the CF. Now, if this is our cell, and it has a little bit of salt, or this is the water, right? So there's salt outside and salt inside. Let's say this is known as homeostasis. Now, this is a normal amount. Now, if we uptake a large amount of water, so this is where we are, and we're ingesting in a depleted state glucose, so the glucose goes into the cell. Now, sodium goes in with those carbohydrates. What we have is in this cell is a higher amount of salt and carbohydrates in the cell. And the problem is there is less outside of the cell. So the body wants homeostasis, it's all about balance. What will happen is it'll uptake more water into the cell to balance the cell out. So then what actually happens is, this is the compensation effect, and it can take up to 72 hours. This is why on one day of carb loading, sometimes people look better on the day after their event. So this is also another reason for why I've given Constance 2 days of carb refeed, because we've practiced with her carb refeeds, and it's after one day she looks really good the next day, but doesn't goes again and pulls up even nicer. And the other reason to that is also it just gives Constance more time to relax, chill out, allow the body to do its thing, and really just tighten up through the midsection. So Water gets uptaken into the cell, so the intramuscular cell looks fuller and looks bigger. Now, if we go and train and burn all those carbohydrates, well, then we're going to lose that effect. So what we're wanting to do is maximize that. So this is why she doesn't train from after Friday. So that's what's going on. So we have this compensation effect, and then we stop the water loading from Saturday afternoon. So then all the water gets pushed, because the body will think it's got lots of water in it, and it'll flush the water outside of the cell. And then over time, over the next 24 to 40 hours, it'll pull the water out of the cell and then balance itself back out. So this is known as a natural act of diuresis. So that concludes that base of information. Now for the glycogen depletion, the program is we're going to focus on high rep work. We are going to be looking at the body comp of Constance. Now the thing is, if you think about bikini competitors, we're looking at glutes, hemis, back, arms, delts, but we're not really looking too much at chest. We're looking at a little bit of abs and a little bit of quad. So the exercises we've selected are to suit the areas that we want to work on. It's only 2 sets, and we've calculated the weights. Rest is as decided, or as she sees fit, and it's only for 2 sets and then moves on. So it should be quite quick. We're just causing a little bit of fatigue. We're not looking to push to grow muscle, not in this state. And we're pushing it because we want to get straight into the goodness of the carb refeed. Now the challenge with the carb refeed is Constance has been in a state for an extended period of time, so digestion could be a little bit sluggish. So the first thing she'll do is straight after she's trained is just do a liquid protein shake, about 25 grams of pea protein and 50 grams of glucose. So ratio of 1 to 2. So she gets liquid into her about an hour, and thereafter she'll then start to eat her first carb meal. So that is the facts of the glycogen depletion, pushing more for the posterior work, a bit of arms, delts, and a little bit of quads. And then that'll signal to the body, this is where we want to put the carbohydrates. If you noticed in an athlete, and this isn't using Constance, this is just to say if we had an athlete in future who maybe was lagging in the arms, we would probably train the arms a little bit harder here. So then we're signaling for the body to put glucose there to help bring in some more cell swelling in that area. So yeah, that's the notes on carb depletion and what we're going to do with it. Enjoy.